That night, the winter wind swept across the hill, carrying a sound so faint it could have been mistaken for rain.
It's okay.
But Martha, who had spent half her life on that wooden porch with her old cat Willow, knew it wasn't the wind. When she opened the door, she saw a tiny creature trembling in the snow, its breath a fading thread of smoke. She didn't know then that the moment her hand touched that soaked fur, 3 lives quietly changed their course forever. Wind pressed against the old porch like a slow heartbeat, rattling the loose screen and carrying the smell of wet pine. Martha Green paused with her hand on the latch, listening. Beyond the eaves, the mountain road lay empty and dark. Then the sound returned thin, frayed. Not quite a cat's cry, not the wind, either something small, trying not to disappear. Willow lifted her head and stared at the door. The housecat moved first, slipping off the chair with a stiff, dignified hop. Willow was old, but the sound pulled her taut, ears pricked to the seam of night. Martha cracked the door, and a ribbon of cold slid in, silvering her breath. She clicked on the porch light. The beam fell across wet steps, a tilted bucket, and a shadow huddled beneath the lip of the stair. The cry fluttered, then went quiet. She crouched, joints complaining, palms braced on rough boards. Under the stair, 2 eyes glinted, wide and glass blue, set in a small face flecked with frost. The body was all angles and tremor, fur clumped with melt and grit. Not a kitten longer legs, wrapped muscle under the thin bobcat. The word arrived like a bell in her chest, bright and warning at once. The cub hissed without sound, a breath more than a threat, then tucked in smaller, as if the wood itself might fold around him. Martha stayed still, letting the cold work between them. She smelled sap, wet earth, the faint iron of fear. "It's okay," she said, voice pressed low. Willow padded to her ankle and settled, tail curling like a question mark around her boot. Lightning stitched silently behind the ridge, and somewhere far off a truck downshifted on the grade. The cub blinked slow, lids heavy, as if the world were too large to hold focus. His flank lifted and fell with a stutter, steam ghosting in thin threads. Martha recognized the rhythm, the fragile staccato that says a body is spending its last coins. She felt the tug of old training wake in her hands. She slid one glove off and held her bare fingers open, palm upturned to the dark heat in the air, a small promise. The cub tasted it with his eyes first, nose twitching, whiskers trembling like fine wire. He didn't move. Willow did. The housecat stepped closer, not crouched for play, but tall, deliberate. She offered a soft, unmoored trill and pressed her forehead to Martha's shin, as if to steady the moment. Martha edged sideways to widen the doorway's spill of light. The cub flinched, pushed deeper, then stopped when his shoulders hit the riser. The space had no more room to give. A tiny sound slipped out of him, half mule, half air. It hooked something in her she had hidden with chores and quiet years. "All right," she murmured, to herself, to the night, to whatever rules would scold her. She shrugged off her coat and laid it like a path across the boards, the collar brushing the stair. The smell of wood smoke and soap and Willow's fur lifted from the fabric. The cub watched it, as if it might turn to teeth. Willow moved again, slower still, and touched her nose to the coat, then to the gap. then back, showing the way with a patience Martha hadn't seen since her husband was alive. Rain started, light and precise, tapping the gutter with a tinny hush. The cub's ears flicked toward it, then flattened. He lifted one paw, placed it on the coat, paused at his own audacity, and dragged the rest of him after, inch by burning inch. When he reached the fold, he sagged. Martha felt her breath shake. She slid her arms beneath the fabric, keeping the world soft around him. He weighed almost nothing. Warmth bled upward through the coat, as if it were leaking from a cracked lamp. The cub's heart ticked against her wrist, quick and thin. He didn't fight, only watched her with those washed-out eyes, as if memorizing the shape of her face, in case the dark took it away. Martha rose slow. Willow walked at her heel, tail brushing the hem like a metronome of trust. Inside, the kitchen light was kinder. The room smelled of tea and lemon oil, and the damp wool of winter. Martha cleared a spot near the stove and set the coat down, cupping the edges so he didn't slip. The fire clicked, a polite throat clearing from the iron belly, and a warm tide lifted through the air. The cub's fur began to loosen, clumps relenting into soft. His sides chased his breath and found it again. She fetched a small towel, warmed it between her palms, and pressed it to his paws, one and then the next, working gently where mud had turned to stone. He didn't like the towel, but accepted it, eyes closing in a fluttering surrender that wasn't fear so much as relief. Willow came close, stopped just short, and lowered herself into a watchful loaf. The practiced stillness of a sentry who knows patience is a kind of shelter. When the shaking eased, Martha mixed a little warm water and broth in a chipped saucer and set it near his nose. The scent tilted his head. He stretched his tongue, touched the surface, and took 3 awkward licks. The sound was so small it felt private, like a secret between heartbeat and breath. She smiled without meaning to, the way a person does when morning breaks while they weren't looking. The storm rebuttoned the sky and moved on, leaving the house to its ticking and sighing. The cub drowsed, eyes roaming, then sliding shut. Martha sat on the floor beside the coat, back against the cabinet, palms flat to cool linoleum, as if grounding herself to the quiet. Willow shifted once, and, after a long consideration, inched forward until her shoulder touched the edge of fur. The cub didn't lift his head. He only stopped shivering. Outside, the porch dripped to a slower tempo, and the mountains arranged themselves into their winter shape, shoulders squared, voices low. Martha watched the small rise and fall, and let the clock forget to matter. There would be calls to make, rules to weigh, opinions to navigate. But not yet. Tonight, the wild wore a smaller name, and it fit against her kitchen floor like a promise not to vanish. Morning slid in on a pale ribbon of light, thinning the shadows along the kitchen floor. The bobcat cub lay where the coat had become a nest, breath a little steadier, eyes filmed with sleep. Willow stretched, spine like a drawn bow, and settled near him again. Martha moved softly, as if footfalls alone could spill the fragile warmth they had gathered overnight. She warmed broth and water to the edge of a whisper, stirred in a smear of softened food, then tested the rim with her lip. The cub watched, wary and curious, whiskers beaded with the new day. When the saucer touched the floor, he crept forward, stopped, and glanced at Willow as if a door might close. Willow answered with a slow blink that felt like permission. His tongue found the surface and learned it, small strokes that grew bolder. Broth darkened the pale fur under his chin. Martha knelt, counting the swallows in her head, grateful for each one. The cub's shoulders were all sharp lines beneath the fluff, a map of every night he'd outrun. She murmured his name for the first time, almost by accident. "Ash," she said, and the kitchen held it. By mid-morning, she called Dr. Louise Carter. Old colleague, straighter spine than most church pews. Louise listened without interrupting, then let out a breath that meant history. "You know the rules," Martha did. She knew, too, the sound the wild had made on her porch. "He won't make it without help," she said, "and he chose us." Silence shifted. "I'll come by," Louise replied. Rain had burned off to a quiet shine. Ash tried his legs, unsure of the new gravity inside the room. He wobbled to the edge of the coat, paused, and tapped the linoleum with one paw, like a pianist testing a note. Willow rose and walked beside him in miniature parade. Tail lifted, an escort with old court manners. Together they toured a kingdom of chair legs and low sun. When Louise arrived, her boots kept their opinions to themselves. She washed her hands, crouched, and let professionalism square her features. Ash stared back, nose flaring, choosing whether to vanish or hold. He didn't retreat. She checked gums, paws, the faint singe along his foreleg. Dehydrated, hungry, tough, she said, softening at the edges. He needs time, heat, quiet. She left a small bag, syringes without needles, powdered formula, salve for the burn, and a look that said every favor costs courage. "He's wild," Louise added in the doorway. "Don't teach him to forget it," Martha nodded. Willow, as if insulted on principle, angled her body between them and Ash, a small grey wall with steady breath. Louise's mouth twitched. He picked a good house. Afternoon opened its hand, warm and slow. Ash slept in brief, bright pieces, and woke like someone stepping off a train, surprised the platform held. When Martha dabbed salve on the singe, he tensed, then leaned into the cooling. Willow groomed the air an inch above his ear, never quite touching, a blessing without weight. The stove ticked, the clock forgot to announce itself. Later, wind skimmed the eaves and made the gutters hum. A motorcycle passed on the road, and Ash shrank into himself, eyes gone to blue glass, claws whispering on the coat's hem. The world, for a heartbeat, grew too loud. Willow crossed the space and pressed her flank to his, a warm seam he could measure by. He exhaled, long and shaky, and watched the noise go by the window like weather. At dusk, Deputy Ray's cruiser rolled slow along the fence, a polite orbit. He didn't knock. Martha stood in the dark and let the taillights fade. She could hear the unasked questions in the gravel's hush. When she turned back, Ash was on his feet, listing but upright. He tracked the last smear of red through glass, then refocused on something closer, the steady candle of Willow's gaze. Martha mixed a thinner feed for evening. Small sips tightened into small swallows. The little engine inside him found a smoother rhythm. After, he investigated the gap beneath the stove, practiced a crouch he barely owned, and startled at his own reflection in the oven door. Willow touched noses with the ghost cat on the glass, then with Ash, as if to say the world contains both. When night laid itself down, Ash chose the coat again, but shifted, so his ribs brushed Willow's shoulder. He slept with his mouth parted, one paw curled above his chest, like a promise he might remember in the morning. Martha dimmed the lamp and sat in the doorway, hands around a mug gone cold, listening for what the house would decide to keep. The silence felt earned, not empty. Sometime near midnight, Ash woke and watched the square of window turned to ink. His ears tracked a fox's distant bark, mapped it, and let it go. He inched forward until his whiskers found Willow's breath. She didn't stir. He let weight leave his bones again. In the thin space between two ticks of the cooling stove, the wild and the warm learned the shape of each other and did not break. Morning thinned the fog along the fence line, and the town woke like a slow accordion, one porch at a time. Ash listened from the kitchen threshold, nose pressed to the screen, pulling in the damp recipe of creek water and wood smoke. The world was bigger now, but it fit inside his lungs in careful halves. Willow sat beside him, eyes half closed, as if measuring the day for trouble. By noon the wind carried voices, not close, but shaped enough to mean. The bakery boy's laugh, the mechanic's radio, the short bark of a dog that claimed every delivery truck. Ash held still, ears swiveling, reading the map of who belonged. He tested the screen with one claw, not to escape, only to ask what kept him. Willow flicked a tail like a no, and he let the question go. Word travelled along other wires too. A neighbour's text, a glance over a fence, the way the diner hushes for half a beat when a story grows legs. Somewhere, someone said Martha was keeping a wild one in her kitchen. The town didn't hiss, exactly. It just tilted its head, like a bird deciding what the shadow was. Ash felt none of it, only the air shift around names. Deputy Ray rolled up near 3, the cruiser idling with a patient hum. Ash watched from the hallway, the silhouette of a hat through rippled glass. The door opened, and human dust followed boots inside. Ray's voice came gentle, but braced. "Afternoon, ma'am." Ash tasted the bass of it, low, cautious, not unkind. He lowered his head just enough to be harder to see. Ray spoke in careful circles. Rules, rescue centres, bite risk, blame. Words with edges Martha already knew. Ash studied the shape of the man's hands, the click of his thumb against a belt snap, a rhythm that said he doubted himself more than he let on. Willow parked between the coat nest and the law, spine making a small mountain. She didn't blink until he did. When the door closed again, the house held its breath, then released it. Martha stood a while without moving, a quiet that wasn't defeat so much as weather passing through. Ash stepped out, touched her ankle with his whiskers, then moved back, as if to say he could be small when the room needed it. She exhaled. "We'll do this right," she said. The promise fit the air. Near dusk, a noise rose from the tree line, like thread pulled from dark cloth. It wasn't the neighbor's dog. It wasn't radio. It was older, low as a creek under ice. Ash froze, shoulders rounding, pupils blackening the blue. He answered with silence that quivered. Willow lifted her head and listened with both ears and bones. The house leaned toward the woods, wanting to know. There in the far field, something limped the light thin. A bobcat full grown, hip favoring its weight, tail a metronome of pain and patience. Ash knew her the way a shore knows a wave, without thinking. His mouth opened in a sound he did not finish. The wild outside wore the smell of iron and fern, and an old promise that wanted collecting. The air made room for blood. He moved to the door, fast and small, as if speed could make him less seen. The screen was a skin he didn't understand, and he tested it with 2 paws, then 4, muscles lit for flight. The forest voice called again, closer now, then caught, as if teeth on a hidden wire had snagged the sound itself. Ash's body shook so hard, his whiskers beat the frame. The panic wanted to widen him to breaking. Willow answered first. She crossed the tile, climbed the chair back, and stepped onto the sill so her warmth spilled across the hinge of his spine. She pressed her cheek to his ear, a steady hum through bone, not denial, a tether. His breath hitched, then found the space between hers. The room returned in pieces, the stove tick, the clock, Martha's hand. Martha cracked the door an inch, just enough for scent to cross. Night slid its blade in, cool and clean. The field held nothing now but grasses, flattening themselves back into ordinary. The limping shape was gone, but the track in Ash's ribs remained. He stood in the doorway with one paw lifted. The question, a living thing, Martha whispered. Soon, not like this. Later, the town's chatter trailed off to dishes and television and rain gutters. Ray's cruiser passed a last time, slow and without stopping. Ash curled into the coat and set his face in the fold that held Willow's sleep-warm scent. He was still, and not a coiled spring, learning how to be a cup outside. The woods unspooled the night carefully, as if aware of new ears. When sleep finally came, it came in shallow lakes. Ash drifted, surfaced, drifted again. Each return marked by the soft weight of Willow's tail against his shoulder. The wild hadn't left him. It had drawn a circle and waited. He didn't forget the limp or the call. He only folded them into the room's hush, storing them like a winter cache. The house, for now, held. All day the sky held its breath, a lid of pewter pressed low over the hills. By late afternoon, the porch light came on without being asked. Ash watched the edge of the yard, where grass met field, nerves tuned to a frequency the house couldn't hear. Willow dozed on the chair arm, one eye a thin coin, measuring calm like a ration not to be wasted. The first wind came like a rumour. It slid under the eaves and tested the nails, found one that sang. Ash lifted his head and tasted the air, mouth half open, catching the metal bite that rides a storm. Martha checked the windows and laughed softly at herself, at the way weather still startled a woman who had outlived 3 roofs. The laugh landed and rolled away. Rain began in single notes, polite at first, then a steady drum. The gutters took it in, then choked. Ash tracked the sound from corner to corner, mapping the house by its seams. The stove clicked and settled. The clock argued with itself. Somewhere beyond the fence, a branch complained in long vowels. Willow came down from her throne and touched her shoulder to his. When the lights blinked, the kitchen held a heartbeat of darkness and returned. Martha set candles anyway, amber pools in small glass rivers. Ash's pupils widened until the room fit inside them. He stood tall and narrow, a reed in wind, ready to bend or break. Willow sat with the poise of old queens and listened past the noise for what it hid. The air leaned harder. The next blink did not end. Power stepped out of the room and closed the door. For an instant, the house became older than itself. Wind shouldered the porch, and the screen rattled its loose song. Martha crossed to the fireplace, coaxed last night's coals with careful breath, added kindling until a new throat of flame took on the work of being warm. Gusts arrived in ranks. They hit the old maple and forced it to remember every year it had stood here. Something cracked, not far, not near, the way distance lies in a storm. Ash flinched, but didn't flee. He paced the seam of shadow and firelight, reading where to be. Willow followed, close enough for their whiskers to argue and agree. A single animal with two hearts. The branch came through the porch glass like a bad idea finally chosen. The sound startled the room into motion. Wind rushed in, carrying cold and leaves and a handful of rain like thrown grit. The draft found the fireplace and pulled. Flame leaned out in a wild bow, kissed the edge of a curtain, and moved on with sudden appetite. Martha turned, saw the orange running up the fabric like a child on a dare, and went for the water bucket. The floor found her heel. She fell hard, breath knocked loose, calf pinned by a slivered plank. The storm had nudged into place. Ash saw the shape of her slowed on the ground, and the new light licking high. His body decided before thought could contradict. He crossed the room in 3 silent bounds, low and long, a strip of hunger aimed at the wrong meal. Heat swatted his whiskers flat, curled them into commas. He planted himself at her shoulder, mouth open to pant air that wasn't there, and tugged the cuff of her jeans with small teeth. Willow climbed the chair and leapt, swatting at the burning hem until ash snowed down. Martha dragged at the plank, too heavy to budge. Smoke thickened its own weather. Ash bit higher, found the denim seam that would hold, and pulled with his whole spine, claws scoring the floor into a ledger of effort. He hissed without sound, a line of steam written between his teeth. Willow pressed herself against Martha's thigh and pushed, a heartbeat of weight the leverage needed. The plank shifted. Martha slid free, that last tight inch, rolled to her side, and blew the flames smaller. She smothered the curtain with a wool throw, starved it back to ember. The room staggered towards silence. A drunk who'd found the doorframe. Ash stood above her, chest heaving, singed fur trimming his foreleg like a bad haircut. He kept his mouth open, as if the fire might return for the air inside him. For a while, everything was listening. The rain returned to its ordinary work on the roof. Wind unclenched by degrees. Hands off the house, one finger at a time. Willow licked the blackened hem, as if apology could be groomed into forgiveness. Martha reached for Ash, palm flat, not to pull him closer, but to let his trembling find a match. He leaned and let the shaking spend itself. When the last smoke curled up the chimney, Martha washed the singe with cool cloth and salve. Ash hated the sting and loved the relief. He set his head on her knee, eyelids lowering a fraction with each careful touch. Willow settled against his side, vibrated a quiet motor that seemed to oil the room. Candlelight made their shadows taller and more certain on the far wall. Later, with boards tacked over the broken pane and a second blanket nailed where the curtain had been, the kitchen breathed a softer pitch. Ash tested his foot and found it bearable. He climbed the coat, circled once, and lay so that his ribs brushed Willow's. Martha sat on the floor and let the silence fold around them like clean linen. The storm kept talking outside, but it spoke from farther away. Sun moved different after the fire, slower, more deliberate, as if light had learned to walk with care. Ash slept long and woke in sections, testing the singed foreleg with a cautious lift. Willow kept to his shadow, grooming the air an inch above the burn, an old ritual performed without touch. Martha opened the back door to let the cool share the room without taking anything. Dr. Louise came with a kit and a frown that kept melting. She checked the skin, the breath, the stubborn little engine inside his ribs. Ash didn't flinch at her hands this time. He watched her eyes, decided they were honest, then turned his head toward Willow's hum. "It's clean," Louise said. "Salve twice a day. Quiet, warmth, patience." Martha nodded like prayer. They moved into the shed while glass was replaced and the wall relearned its shape. The shed had a tin roof and a view of elms. Ash approved of the shadow's cool corners that smelled like rakes and soil, and the old summers stored in wood. Willow found a crate and made it into a throne. Together, they listened to hammers from the house, like distant thunder that meant safety. Feeding became a ceremony. Martha warmed formula till it thought about steam, thinned broth until it remembered being river. Ash lapped slow, eyes sliding shut at each swallow, as if the body had to choose to keep it. After, he pressed his cheek to Willow's shoulder and let the purr stitch him back together. The burn edged from angry red to the colour of peaches left in shade. One afternoon, Deputy Ray parked, hat in hand, as if he'd come to apologize to the weather. He stood outside the shed and asked, "How's the then settled on? How's he doing?" Ash watched from the doorway, catching the gravel in the man's voice, and the worry caught under it. Ray set down a sack of feed, looked anywhere but Martha's eyes, and said he'd been wrong to hurry the law. That night, the roof taught Rain how to play in keys. Ash lay lengthwise and followed the song with his ears left, right, near, far, until the shed became a map he knew by drip and hush. The wound tugged when he breathed deep. Willow moved closer and leaned just enough to share the work. Martha's lamp threw a soft circle, and inside it, the world became one household-sized promise. Strength returned, like a polite guest knocking, waiting, taking off its shoes. Ash tested stretches, found where the skin pulled, backed out of the pain with a grudging grace. He stalked a moth through a column of dust and let it go at the sill. He climbed a shelf 2 boards high, planted his pride there, then climbed down because Willow did not approve of miracles wasted on foolishness. Louise changed the bandage and left advice curled on the table like ribbon. "He'll remember the heat," she said. "He'll test doors when the wind smells right." Ash watched her mouth form the future and tilted his head. Outside, the elms practiced leaf talk in a small breeze. He measured the space between the shed and the tree line and filed it in a place behind his eyes. By the second week, fur fuzzed along the edge of the singe, a halo that looked like the start of a story. Ash's gait smoothed until the limp became a memory used for weather. He resumed quiet patrols, coat nest to door, door to window, window to Willow and back, a clock that told time by breath. He listened for the limping voice from the field and heard only crickets braiding night. Work crews finished, and the house took its old breath with a cleaner lung. Martha walked room to room, palms on frames, a benediction of fingertips. Ash stepped onto the kitchen tile as if crossing a river made of shine. He paused at the patched window, sniffed the new wood, then leaned his face into the square of sun that had always been his. The light fit like a remembered coat, but healing brought appetite that wasn't hunger. Some evenings the ridge gilded itself, and Ash would stand at the threshold, nose full of fern and far-off stone, body leaning the way a compass leans. Willow parked beside him, shoulder to shoulder, and made a sound too low to be song. Not a denial, not permission, a witness. Martha stood behind them and learned to breathe between those two truths. The first moth of summer slipped inside and discovered the lamp. Ash tracked it with a slow, reverent turn, then didn't leap. He looked from the light to Willow, to the dark beyond the glass. Choice hovered like dust in a sunbeam, visible only when you tilt your head. He set his chin on the sill, closed his eyes halfway, and let the night pass by, like a river no one owns. When sleep came, it brought a cleaner quiet. Ash dreamed in small pictures. The coat, the warm bowl, the sound the rain made when it forgave the roof. The burn did not vanish. It learned to speak less often. Willow's breath clocked beside, his two metronomes moving toward the same minute. Beyond the patched window, the woods practiced patience, saving a door-sized breeze for a later day. Evening came on like a slow tide, brushing the porch in gold that lingered on the patched window. Ash stood at the threshold, taller now, weight balanced quiet on healed paws. The yard carried the day's warmth, like a memory it wasn't ready to release. He read the air, the way he read a face nose lifted, whiskers tuned to a story only wind could tell. Martha shelled beans at the table, half watching him through the screen's small squares. Willow settled into a practiced loaf, her tail draped like a ribbon over the sill. Ash took one deliberate step onto the top step, then another, as if the boards might test him. Nothing complained. The world accepted his weight with the courtesy of old wood. He found the yard's edge and paused where clover gave to taller grass. A moth tilted past his cheek and kept it secret. Somewhere beyond the elms, a creek stitched itself to dusk. He softened at the knee, testing a crouch, not to pounce, but to feel his body close to earth again. Willow watched from the door, patient as a lighthouse. A low sound drifted from the tree line, not quite a call, not exactly pain, more like a name remembered after too long. Ash froze, every line of him drawn to a finer point. The grass answered with a tremor. He slipped forward 3 paces, a shadow learning its older shape. The air cooled by a degree, and the yard felt briefly like a borrowed room. She stepped out of the brush, broad-shouldered, lean, one hip guarding an old loss. The adult's tail moved with the discipline of winter. Her coat held dust and fern. Her eyes held assessment. Ash's mouth opened around a sound that barely existed. A wire pulled tight between surprise and recognition. The space between them felt measured in heartbeats rather than feet. The adult bobcat worked her weight carefully, circled half the clearing, then stilled. Her head tilted, drawing the line of him into her. Her ears, scarred at the edge, spoke first. Listen, decide, remember. Ash took another step, the porch receding until the house belonged to yesterday. He set his paw in the shallow print she'd made and let his ribs learn the rhythm. Willow rose and came to the porch rail, not calling, not pleading, just present. Martha stood behind the screen, hands gentle on the frame. She didn't whisper his name. The choice needed silence to grow. Ash looked back once. Willow's eyes were steady as a kettle on a simmer. It was permission and instruction, both. Love does not block the door. The adult moved again, a brief loop that tested wind and cover. She paused when her paw rolled wrong, and the limp flared. Her breath shortened, then smoothed. Ash mirrored the pause, then eased forward, closing the last safe distance. Their noses met the way soft weather meets a mountain, cautious, respectful, aware of edges, carved before their time. Scents braided smoke and lemon oil sealed to his fur, iron and leaf pressed into hers. The world seemed to contract, putting the creek and the town and the road into smaller, quieter boxes. Ash blinked slow, absorbing a language learned long before kitchens and coats. The adult blinked back, less question than inventory. A bond didn't need ceremony to be true. A jay shouted from the pine, and the adult flinched, head snapping to the noise. Ash followed the cut of her gaze, saw nothing but the bird's idea of drama. When he looked back, she had already pivoted toward the trees. She waited 3 heartbeats, the kind you can count in your feet, then slid into the edge of dark, leaving her answer rolled across the grass like thread. He glanced at the house once more. Willow stood with her flank pressed to the rail, tail making a slow figure 8, as if tying something and cutting it at the same time. Martha's silhouette held still, a blessing not spoken aloud. Ash stepped after the adult, the yard passing under him like a map he'd folded into his chest. The gate clicked as wind worried it, a soft applause. The tree line accepted him with the ease of a door he'd always known. Branch tips brushed his shoulders, scoring a faint song into his fur. The adult kept a slow pace, letting him read. Twice she tested him with a quick veer. Twice he corrected without sound. The creek's voice grew clearer. Thin silver poured through stone. He matched his breath to it and felt his edges align. Behind them, light softened to the color of old coins. Willow remained at the rail until shadows ended the yard's grammar. She turned once and returned to the sill, curling into a shape that kept room beside it. In the kitchen, Martha set down the empty bowl and left the screen unlatched. Night reached for the house with open hands, and the house did not close. Summer eased into the bones of the house until doors swelled and screens hummed. Ash was gone to the tree line and the green beyond, a rumour that sometimes wore whiskers. Martha learned the shape of evenings without him. A porch chair, a glass sweating rings on wood. Willow napped where the sun pooled, rising only to check the open screen like a lighthouse off duty. Days found their rhythm. Martha worked mornings at the clinic, washing steel trays, holding a terrier still for stitches, quieting a kid's worry with mints from her pocket. Afternoons she watered the tomatoes and listened for the creak. The shed kept its old cool. Willow patrolled impatient loops, nose to thresholds, as if keeping a ledger of scents that still belonged. Sometimes the woods sent postcards, a tuft of grey snagged on barbed wire, a faint track pressed into damp clay under the elm. Martha bent close, lips parting around a name that never left. Willow sniffed, then sat beside the print with ceremonial care, tail laid in a line like underlining. The track disappeared by morning, replaced by the plain grammar of yard. Deputy Ray started stopping by without a speech. He left corn at the gate, fixed the hinge that complained in wind, and never once mentioned forms. Louise brought honey from a roadside stand and a jar of salve that smelled like mint and dirt. They ate peach slices over the sink and didn't bother with plates. The quiet tasted less like absence, with spoons tapping glass. Autumn coloured the ridge, as if someone had exhaled rust and gold. Ash's return did not happen, then did, in small ways no one could prove. A rabbit's sudden stillness near the fence, the way crows gathered, argued, and lifted as one. Martha left a bowl at the porch corner, because habit is a kind of prayer. Some mornings the rim wore dust in two pale commas. First frost arrived like old wisdom. Willow moved slower, joints narrating stair steps, breath deeper while she slept. On cold afternoons she curled in the laundry basket, as if claiming warm cotton for a throne. Martha built smaller fires and let them linger. When Willow woke, she blinked a long, thoughtful blink toward the trees, the kind that carries both blessing and ache. Winter pressed its ear to every window. The house answered with thin music, kettle hiss, page turn, the soft choreography of slippers. Martha salted the steps and kept the lamp above the porch on a star she could afford. Tracks stitched the yard after snow deer, raccoon, a single line she didn't recognize at first. She stood over it, tilting her head like a student. Willow touched her calf. One night, the wind backed off and the world sharpened. Martha opened the door to scoop the stoop and saw it, a pair of prints leading to the corner where the bowl should be, then angling away into clean white. Broad paths, low space between, the arrogance of balance. She laughed, small and cracked, and didn't call anyone. Willow stared until the sky admitted morning. Peace held, but it was the kind that hums while balancing a glass. In February, Willow stumbled coming down from the chair, a slip that looked like forgetting gravity. Martha caught her but still heard the hollow thump. Louise checked her heart, her teeth, her eyes that were the same old gold. "Slow her down," she said, as if any clock had ever listened. For a week, Willow stayed wrapped in warm. Martha warmed towels on the radiator and turned the pages of a magazine out loud, just to keep the room threaded to sound. At dusk, when the day pulled its light tight, a far shape moved at the field's lip, paused as if reading the house, then dissolved into fur. Willow's ear twitched in her sleep. The bowl wore 2 new commas, spring rehearsed before anyone believed it. Snow retreated, inch by kind inch. Sap found its ladders. Martha opened windows that hadn't been asked anything in months. Willow returned to the sill, narrower now, still sovereign. A bluebird landed on the rail and nodded at some joke only air could tell. The room felt briefly like a porch again, and Martha let it. The first warm rain came with an earthy cheer. You could smell roots telling each other news. Martha set the screen and watched drops net the yard. Something moved where grass met wood. A cat? No, the motion had weight in it, a low grammar she recognized, without translation. It paused, then slipped back, leaving the scent of fern and a breath she kept. Evenings settled into soft weather. Martha wrote Ash's name in the corner of a grocery list, so it wouldn't crowd the middle. Willow dozed against her hip, a purr thin but stubborn, an engine that refused to silence. The woods stayed generous with rumors and stingy with proof. It was enough. The screen stayed unlatched. Some doors are promises, some promises are doors. Morning unbuttoned itself in a thin wash of light, the kind that softens edges without promising anything. The house breathed easy, kettle ticking toward a simmer. Willow slept on the arm of the chair, folded small, paws tucked like a note inside an envelope. Martha moved slow around her, as if sound itself might bruise. Outside, the yard held that hush spring grants to rooms it trusts. Ash was a rumour in the tree line again, a shape sometimes mistaken for weather. Martha set the bowl near the porch rail and didn't wait beside it. Habit had learned to stand back. She trimmed a rose cane and found last year's twine, a faded loop the colour of old hay. When she looked up, a jay skipped along the fence and scolded the morning into fully waking. By noon the clouds came low and silver, kind rain without hurry. Willow woke, stretched halfway, then paused as if the stair down from sleep had an extra step. Martha lifted her gently and felt the lightness that tells the truth. Willow settled in the crook of Martha's elbow, eyes soft with the mercy of years. The purr rose thin and steady, a small motor refusing to complain. The first gust nudged the screen, and with it came a scent that didn't belong to the house. Fern, wet bark, a mineral thread like creek water under stone. Martha lifted her head. Willow's ear twitched. At the edge of the yard, a shadow separated from shadows and became weight, broad shoulders, careful pace. The forest arriving as if it had always owned the path. Ash stepped into the open with the careful grace of rain, deciding where to land. His coat held winter and distance. His eyes kept the colour of clear morning. He didn't rush the porch. He read it, rail, bowl, the chair with the woven seat, the woman holding what time had borrowed. Then he looked at Willow, and something old and exact passed between the two stillnesses. He crossed the last of the grass, no sound but the small decisions of paw on wood. At the bottom step he paused, lowered his head, and set something down. A sprig of meadow sweet, dried and made tender by weather, tied with a loop of twine so faded it could only have come from this yard. He looked at it, then up, as if placing a line where a sentence should end. Martha let the breath she was holding return to the room. The bough of twine recognized its twin in her pocket. A lost piece returned without scolding. Willow watched from the cradle of Martha's arm, gold eyes, bright and calm. Her purr ran out of itself and back in. A tide meeting tide. Ash blinked slow, the wilderness version of thanks or apology, or both. Behind him, the grass rippled and made two smaller shapes. They tumbled the border of brave and careful, ears too big for their plans. Kittens, marked in soft grey with pale smudges like thumbprints of light. Ash flicked an ear and they settled, each step measured by the larger breath in the yard. The scene held, stitched by rain and wood, and the clean clap of quiet. Willow's head grew heavy against Martha's wrist. She opened and closed her mouth in the way very old cats do, tasting the room one last time. Ash lifted his face, drew in her scent, and let out a low sound that seemed to lean its shoulder under the silence. Martha felt the moment tip and didn't try to pull it back. Love doesn't bargain with the honest math of bodies. When Willow exhaled, it sounded like silk being folded, no friction, only release. Martha pressed her cheek to the soft crown and wept without shape. Ash stepped closer, placing one paw on the first stair and then another. He did not touch, only kept a circle around the chair like a guard raised by a country without walls. The kittens waited, learning a lesson older than names. Time, politely, left them alone. Rain softened to a mist that made the porch a small chapel. Martha tucked Willow into the woven seat with a blanket that had known every winter this house had kept. Ash bowed his head a long moment, then turned to his young and touched each with his nose. The porch felt full of good ghosts, none of them asking to be seen. Before he left, Ash lifted the sprig and set it on the chair beside Willow, the twine loop catching on a thread like a ring finding the right finger. He looked at Martha one last time. No plea, no promise, only recognition, and stepped off the porch. The kittens followed his tail's slow metronome, small prints stitching the damp toward trees that opened like a kept vow. After they were gone, the yard remembered how to be yard again. The bowl sat where she'd placed it, wearing rain. Martha sank onto the step, palm on the warm hollow Willow had made. She didn't call anyone. She let the house keep the story it had earned. A bobcat who came home, a housecat who made him possible, a woman who learned that letting go is a kind of staying. Toward evening, the clouds parted and laid a hand of light across the chair. The twine flashed a dull gold, enough to be noticed by someone who knows where to look. Martha rose, opened the screen, and left it unlatched. The creek carried its silver down the hill. Somewhere in the trees, a wild heart moved with two smaller ones in its echo, and the porch, at last, felt complete. If this story touched your heart, just drop a 1 in the comments, or a 0 if it stayed quiet inside you. Don't forget to subscribe. There are more gentle stories waiting just beyond the trees.